All right, let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right. Let's go ahead and get started here this evening. We'll go ahead and get started here with the class. Now tonight we're going to be looking at the statue in chapter 2 of Daniel, and this one again I said, well, it's not going to be very controversial there until I got to the very end of it, and then it does again get controversial. So let's go ahead. I did want to pick up some facts about Babylon. We'll do this until I run out of fun facts, I guess. But it's kind of interesting how big this place was. You know, when you consider an old city, 3,500 years ago, how big this puppy was. But they said it was 14 miles. Is a square, built on a square, and it was 14 miles on the side. Well, that was just for Babylon itself. And but there was actually surrounding suburbs, and it extended across the river, and so it was quite the city. And the brick wall, it had a brick wall rather than stone. It was fired bricks. It went around it. It was like 56 miles long, and then what was incredible to me is that 300 feet high, brick wall 300 feet high, and then it was 25 feet thick, and then behind that even there was another wall, secondary wall, and it extended like 35 feet below the ground. It had a foundation that went down that far. So that is important because we went to a city, the ruins of a city over on the north side of the Sea of Galilee that was. They were able to breach that wall by sneaking up and digging out the first few bottom parts of one of the towers, and then it just came tumbling down, and they were able to breach the wall that way. But with this one here, fired bricks and mortar, it would have been much tougher for them to actually dig out and make the wall fall. And of course, we know that that's not. I'll get into it maybe in a later lesson as to how the walls were actually breached. Then when Darius was able to get into the city and defeat Babylon. So they had like 250 towers that went around the city, and they were 450 feet high. And that to me that's just incredible how tall those things would have been. How big? It would have impressed me to look at that. And then it had a big moat. So as far as a direct frontal assault, it was given the technology of the day back then, it was probably almost impossible for them to get into that city. And then the Euphrates went right through the city, and so they had a water supply, and it was they had ferry boats and all sorts of things there. It was pretty interesting, pretty neat setup. So very impressive for these guys, Daniel and his buddies, to go through that and see that coming from Jerusalem, and to see that. I mean, the temple and all that was very impressive, but I think this would have rivaled that in many ways. Of course, we've all heard about the hanging gardens that were there. That's one of the 8 wonders of the world. And then they used some kind of hydraulic pump, an ancient type of hydraulic pump that sent the water up there. And so it was, again, these things, the streets were paved with stone slabs that were 3 foot square, and they were pretty heavy. I looked at some of the pictures of the ruins of Babylon, and even the ruins are impressive. They had this big tower. Of course, I guess that's where the original Tower of Babel was in this area, because that's where Babylon comes from. And they had like 53 temples and 180 altars. So I mean, this place was quite embedded in the culture of the many gods of the day. And then they had this is what's incredible to me, is this golden image of Baal and this table, 50,000 pounds of gold. That is a lot of gold. And it was just impressive. Really, really was impressive. So anyway, let's go ahead and get to the dream that or get into the chapter itself. So Daniel 2 and 1 through 4, in the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams. His spirit was troubled and sleep escaped him. So the king issued an order to summon the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans, or Chaldeans as I heard it said this week, in order to explain to the king his dreams. When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, may the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will declare the interpretation. Well, unfortunately, it was, we look at this dream here that he had. It was a recurring dream. It happened several times, and it was troubling to him. He couldn't figure out what it was. Now, it depends on who you ask and who you're talking to, whether or not he couldn't reveal the dream because he couldn't remember it, or he just would not reveal the dream. And it to me, I don't know which one it was, but it would seem incredible to me that if he kept having a recurring dream and it bothered him and it was a problem for him, that he couldn't remember it. I figured that, yeah, he's going to remember it, but he figured that, okay, if I tell them the dream, they're going to tell me something, and I wouldn't know whether or not it was true or not. So, being a Middle Eastern potentate that could do or say anything he wanted to without repercussion, he just told them, okay, now you tell me the dream that I had, and I'll get then you can tell me the interpretation. Well, of course, that's kind of crazy. They couldn't tell him the dream, and they go on, back and forth for several verses there. He was saying, well, tell me the dream, and they're saying, no, we can't tell you the dream. You tell us the dream, and we'll interpret. And he says, well, no, you tell me the dream, and then you interpret. And so finally, he got very, very angry with them, and he just ordered the execution of all of his soothsayers. So, but that's in many ways, it's kind of dangerous. That would be like our president getting mad at his cabinet and going ahead and having them all shot at dawn, shooting his whole cabinet. So he would have lost all of his advisors. Now, there is something here that I just wanted to point out, that that this took place, this dream thing, took place in 602 BCE. You remember that in 605, Daniel and his buddies were carried off from Jerusalem into Babylon, and so they had been there in Babylon for about 3 years, and of course Nebuchadnezzar had only started his reign, and so it's kind of confusing because it does say there in the second year of his reign and not the third, but in the way that they would count, sometimes they counted the reign as being when you came to power, that year didn't count, and then you've got the year that you're, then the next year, and then the next year, and then the year that you're in doesn't count. So you could actually be into your fourth year of reigning, and they would say in their manner of counting, they could have said that it was the second year because they didn't count the first and they didn't count the present year. So it was kind of a funky way that they did that, and so that's why there may be some confusion. So, but we kind of figured that this was at the end. This was after Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, had graduated from the Babylonian Academy of Babylonian stuff, and so they'd graduated from this 3 years of training, and but being brand new advisors to the king, they probably weren't invited to this powwow where Nebuchadnezzar is trying to get these guys to tell him about his dream. I mean, it'd be like going to war and deciding, okay, I'm going to bring in all of my ensigns or second lieutenants to give me advice on how we're going to do the war. No, Nebuchadnezzar would have had his brightest and his most trusted advisors in there to tell this, to get this idea about the dream. But just thinking about it, if this took place in 602 and Daniel and his pals had been carried off into Babylon in 605 BCE, remember, they were carried off just right after their bar mitzvahs, and they would have been about 14 or 15 years old, is how they reckon it. And so these guys, they're very, very young, and at the end of the 3 years, maybe they're only, 17, 18, maybe 19 years old. They're not very old at this time. So just keeping that in mind. Nebuchadnezzar at this time was about 32. If we get his birth date right, birth year right, he was about 32. So we're still talking about some fairly young people. I kind of look at Nebuchadnezzar in a way of having the temperament of perhaps a Kim Jong-un that, if anything made him mad, he'd just kind of go crazy and kill people. And so it was just, there was no restrictions on him, and so he could pretty well do what he really wanted to. So at any rate, we don't know whether he really remembered his dream or not, but he put these guys in a real box. Either way, I mean, if they couldn't tell him the dream, they're dead. If they did try to tell him their dream and it was the wrong one, they're dead. So they really, it was a lose-lose situation. The Chaldeans, the people who were Nebuchadnezzar's homeboys, his countrymen, they talked to him in their own language, which would have been Aramaic. But they talked to him in their home language and said, "Look, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, we just can't do this. There's nobody They answered him in the 10th and 11th chapter. It said, says, the Chaldeans answered the king, saying, there is no man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great king, however great or mighty, has ever asked such a thing from any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. What the king asked is too difficult. There is no one who could declare it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with mortals. Now, this, they recognize that they cannot tell Nebuchadnezzar what his dream is, much less tell him what the interpretation would be. And they knew that only God could do what was demanded of them, and only then if the God lived among them. Their ideas, I think, we're not talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What they're talking about is the little g gods of their deities, their idols, and so forth. And so they said, no God can tell us that unless they dwelt among men. Now, that can also mean, if you look at the language there, it doesn't mean like what we would say that how God, the one true God, dwelt with the Israelites by coming down into the tabernacle and the dwelling with them there. Now, what they're talking about here, I believe, is that where a little g God would come down in the form of a man. It says dwelling in flesh. So they're saying that, okay, even if there was someone that we revered as a God in flesh and blood, and would come down, and we could actually talk to them, because otherwise, what are they going to do? They're going to get their instructions by looking at at an idol of some sort, a stone or wood or whatever it is that they're asking of, and then what would they do? They'd go over there and disembowel some goat and throw all of his guts in a bowl and stir it around and do some incantations or something like that, and look at the guts and then make some kind of a decision. Well, that's really, that's what they did. And if you ever watch the movie Masada, the famous Hollywood one with Peter O'Toole in it, that's one of the things that they did every time before he would make a decision to go do anything against Masada. He would call his soothsayers in, and another goat bit the dust, as they would look at all of the stuff in the bowl. And so this is what these guys would have done before Nebuchadnezzar. And they're kind of restricted here. Now, we said that Nebuchadnezzar was just absolutely livid with these guys. He just got madder and madder. And it says that in Daniel 2:12 and 13, because of this, the king became furiously angry and gave orders to execute all the wise men of Babylon. So even this, evidently, this even included the newly graduated cadets from the Babylonian School of Babylonian Stuff, and there even Daniel and his companions were to be executed. So it seems kind of unfair that all these guys would have been executed because they couldn't tell the king what he dreamed. But that's kind of the double-edged sword, the hazards that people would have had to face by having the privilege of working in the king's palace and having all of the benefits that come from that. Now, I think that Daniel and his friends were not part of this original group. The reason for that was when the king's officer came to collect them and says, okay, come with me. You don't need to pack a bag. You won't be long. That they said, well, what's the deal? And he says, well, we're going to go execute you. And he says, well, what for? And so they didn't know what they were being executed for. So they were not part of this original group of advisors. And so, again, God gave Daniel favor with these Babylonians, because he asked the guy that has been ordered to kill him, said, hey, wait a minute, can you give us a little bit of time? We'll go in and we'll consult with our God, and then we'll be able to tell the king his dream. And the captain of the guard bought off on it. And so that night, then Daniel gathered his team together, and they prayed. And sometimes when you get into a problem, you get into a situation that you need to consult your friends, and you need corporate prayer. There's times where you just can't go it alone. That it's just better to have other people praying with you. And it's said in the 17th and 18th verse, then Daniel went to his house, informed his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter. So they would request mercy from God of heaven, the God of heaven, concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not perish along with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So, this captain of the guard gave them the opportunity to do that, and basically gave them a day. And so I'm sure that they probably posted guards outside their quarters, because they give them a day. They could have maybe jumped in the Euphrates and gotten away or something like that. Who knows? But anyway, that night after prayer, the Lord gave Daniel a vision of this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. So anyway, I think it's significant to remember that the ages of Daniel and his friends, they were only about 18 years old. And they were dealing with the most powerful man in civilization. So, I don't know. To me, it's kind of hard to imagine a 17 or 18-year-old being called before, the biggest, most powerful, the baddest dictator in all the world. And, just a day or two earlier, he had ordered the execution of all of his advisors. And it wasn't just a nice, clean little execution, where they, send them to the guillotine or the big sword, or like the queen in Alice in Wonderland that says, off with their heads. No, this was not a clean execution. It says that they would be cut to pieces. And then if you look at the original language there, it says that it gives the idea of being torn limb from limb. One of the ways that they did that was they would tie a person between four trees. They would bend four trees down with some kind of ropes or something. Bend them down, tie these guys off to the tree, and then cut the restraint that's holding the tree. And it'd be like a great big catapult, only pulling you in four different directions, and it would ruin your day, absolutely ruin your day. And so that's the way that they could have been killed. In other ways, it could have literally been, where they tie you down and just chop you to pieces little by little by little, kind of like Saddam Hussein used to do with hanging people in a tree shredder and putting them in feet first. So it was not pretty either way you looked at it. So anyway, Daniel gathered his team. They prayed. God gave them a vision. Now again, they're only about 18 years old, something like that. And I was talking with Michael McGuckin today about it, and I said, can you imagine these 17 or 18-year-old guys going before Nebuchadnezzar? And how difficult that must have been. And Michael just looked at me and says, no, I don't think that was difficult at all. I mean, he says, after all of my 40 some odd years of teaching, 17 and 18-year-olds know everything. They know it all. And so maybe so. I don't know. It's just, I think it would have probably scared the socks off of me anyway. But Daniel, they went before the Lord and got the Lord gave them their the vision. And so, again, he was able to go before Nebuchadnezzar, even though the death penalty had already been given, and the king let him come to him. And he told him right off the bat, he says, look, King Nebuchadnezzar here, this mystery about which you inquired, he says, it's such that a wise man, astrologers, magicians, or sorcerers no one can disclose it to the king. He goes right before him, right in front of him, and says, hey, look, even though we came in here and said, yes, we can tell you, no, we can't tell you what your dream is. So, you can only imagine what Nebuchadnezzar would have been. He's already a little unstable anyhow. And so then Daniel comes in there and says, no, we can't tell you. But then, being a kind of a master of theatrics and I guess Daniel may have been a good preacher too. I don't know, but he gets up there and he says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And so, I mean, that to me, that's a powerful thing. That's when the music would have swelled to, big proportions and the timpani drums. There is a God in heaven who can reveal this. Daniel is not taking any kind of credit for this on his own. That's just the kind of guy he is. He said, no, we cannot tell you, king, but there is a God in heaven. Our God can do that. It's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that can do that. And so then he proceeds to tell him what the dream was. And of course, we all know what it was. It was that Daniel, the 32nd and 35th through the 35th verse in the second chapter. The head of that statue was of pure gold, its breast and its arms of silver, the belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly iron and partly clay. And while you were watching, a stone was cut, but not by hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, like that the wind blows away. Not a trace of them could be found. Then the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the, I don't know, if you look at the statues or what the representations of, this is, I guess, a modern representation. And this is kind of what you look on the internet and you say Nebuchadnezzar's statue. This is what you get. The guy sitting up there with the little mini skirt on and the Babylonian beard and so forth. This is kind of what all of the pictures painted, and perhaps that was because there were other things that showed that kind of model. But then he went on to talk about, well, what did these things mean? At this point, Nebuchadnezzar, if he was sober and smart, he would have been blown away, because now here comes this 17 or 18-year-old young man in to tell him with all the confidence in the world that, okay, king, this is what you dreamed. And sure enough, that's kind of what he dreamed. And so then he gave him the interpretation of the dream, and this kind of played right into the narcissism and I don't know, I guess the psyche of any dictator back in those days, or maybe even today. The head of gold, he would have liked this. He would have liked the idea that God is revealing something to him, and it's the head of gold. That's Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. That he is he's the head. He's the top. He's the big kahuna at this point. And then it goes on and says, "But after you, your kingdom will not last forever." So that's Nebuchadnezzar must have known that kingdoms don't last forever. And because he had just defeated the Egyptians, and so he knew that their hold on the world didn't last, and he was just one of the ones, and he was on top now. The torso and arms of silver. Now, this is the Medo-Persian Empire. We know that from history that the Medo-Persians came in, and I think it's significant to look again at what Daniel was telling Nebuchadnezzar, because at this point he can say, okay, you are the head of gold, but now I'm going to prophesy a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. That, we talk about the torso of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron. And then when we know, or we think we know, depending on your interpretation of it, what these four areas of the body signified. But then it comes to the feet of clay and iron, and we know, the torso being the Medo-Persians, the belly and the thighs, brass being the Greek Empire, and the big dog with the Greek Empire was, of course, Alexander the Great. And then you got the legs of iron, that's the Roman Empire. That all happened. When Daniel gave that interpretation, that would have been prophecy. That would have been something that's going to happen in the future. Well, and the feet of clay would actually be in the future for Daniel. But what is that for us? The feet of clay, has that happened yet? No. So we think that what that is we're talking about on the feet of clay, that's gone from prophecy or prophecy that has actually turned into history. And now we're looking at eschatology, meaning the end times, or the study of end times, and what would the feet of clay and iron mean? I put a question mark in there because I don't agree with a lot of the people that have put in their 2 cents worth about what the feet of clay and iron would be. It's amazing some of the things that you read out there that people will talk about these things. So Daniel was involved in, he was telling the king what's happening now, prophesying what's going to happen in the future that actually came true in history. And then he's also talking about something that is going to happen in the future. It's going to happen in our future because it hasn't happened yet. So I believe we can say that if these things which Daniel interpreted and prophesied, the Nebuchadnezzar being the head of gold, the Medo-Persians under Darius and Cyrus and so forth were the silver, and that happened. Then the Greek Empire came along. That was the belly and thighs of the brass. That happened. Then the Roman Empire and the legs of iron, that happened. And people talk about it, that the torso being, the torso and arms. It had 2 arms. So that was the Medes and the Persians, which allied together to defeat Babylon. Then, what about the legs of iron? There's 2 of them, but there's only one Roman Empire. Well, you could say that it was because the Roman Empire was split into the western side of it and the eastern side, being headquartered in Rome for the western part of the Roman Empire, the other being the eastern side of the Roman Empire, headquartered in Constantinople, and developed separate history, even separate religion between the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox. You could look at it that way, and possibly that was. So if all of those things happen just like Daniel, then we can say that, this feet of clay, even though we don't recognize what it may be yet, could very well. It's going to happen. Something is going to happen, and the rest of the dream. What did it talk about? It said that there would be. Here's a nice picture. Who thought of that? Down here at the iron and clay. I found one that says end times, because I didn't agree with these guys that said, well, the feet of iron and clay, that's the revitalized Roman Empire, and the 10 nations of Europe are going to rise up. Then I can remember when the European Union was coming together. A lot of the biblical prognosticators were saying, here it is. This is the 10-nation federation, because there were 10 nations in the European Union. Then there were 11. Then there were 12, 13. It got up to about 23 nations that were in the European Union. So then they kind of had to back off of that a little bit. And who knows? I mean, the European Union is falling apart even as we speak. So I don't know. That's just something. I don't think that it was the European Union per se that Daniel was talking about. The iron and the clay. Iron and clay don't mix. You cannot physically or chemically put those two together and have a real strong bond between the two. They're going to break apart. They're going to be separate entities. Now, looking at the translations, one of them talks about the clay being a fired clay, and then another translation said, no, it wasn't fired clay, it was miry clay. And so then whoever was developing their own theory of the who the iron and the clay, the feet of iron and clay were, they had their own deal of it. I learned that, and my sarcasm kind of runs here, that they said, well, the feet of iron and clay, that was Roman Catholic Church gave birth to the religion of Islam and funded it and got Mohammed started on it. That was so ludicrous on its face that I said, I don't have enough time to read this foolishness. And so I went off. But again, because I got it far enough into it that they were talking about the Roman Catholic Church, or the Pope is the Antichrist, and it's the great Satan, and it's just all sorts of stuff like that, and which I have a hard time believing that. Let's go back to that iron and clay there, the end times. Now, some of the things that I've heard or read about, there are interpretations that are out there, that it's a revitalized Holy Roman Empire, which, there's nothing, somebody had said there's nothing holy nor Roman, and it's not an empire. So he didn't know how it was going to be that. The other one is that the Roman Catholic Church is the end time thing there that's going to give rise to the Antichrist. Joel Richardson, if you've read any of his stuff, he and Walid Shubat have come out recently within the last 10 years or so talking about that. They look at the iron and clay as being revitalization of the Ottoman Empire. That was the Arab Empire that reigned from, that once they conquered the Middle Eastern areas and much of Africa and Southern Europe and Spain and those things, they parts of that empire lasted for 600-700 years. Until 1923, when after World War I, Turkey was defeated. The head of the Ottoman Empire was Turkey, and that was defeated in World War I, and so that could have been. And they make a pretty good case for that. The iron and clay being the Sunni and the Shia. There's another one, the end-time political system of many nations, some strong, some weak. who will not be able to join together into an all-powerful empire. Now, that brings us to a question, because there was a question here about the clay and the iron, a one world government and one world religion. Well, I personally am not that much of a proponent of the one world government so much, unless it was talking about this, the world being the part of the Middle East and the known world at that time, being under, say, Islam, where they just kind of conquer everything. And if you look at it right now, all of the nations right around Israel, everything is all Islamic. That's pretty much, and they're pushing for a caliphate. It's not a one world government yet, more splintered groups and everything like that than a porcupine's nest. But and the one world religion, possibly again. But even so, who kills more Muslims than anybody? Muslims, because the Shias kill the Sunnis kill the Muslims, and so I don't know. I'm not one that looks at the one world government, one world religion as something that would actually conquer all of the globe that we're talking about, the one world, because even Yeshua talked about, he says, in divers places, in different places, there will be this, and this. He didn't say the entire world of every man, woman, and child in the world is going to be under this one world government. I don't know. I don't see it. Other people do. But anyway, that this feet of iron and clay kind of point to me that it's going to be kind of a fractured governments or a fractured scene out there. And then I'm going to finish off with this and the stone. Now, while he said you're watching all of this thing, and then there you see a stone that's cut out of a mountain. It's a stone that's cut without hands. And this is now in the days of those kings, the God of heaven, those kings being the down in the feet of iron and clay, said, now in those days, those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will this kingdom be left to another people. It will crush and bring to an end all of these kingdoms, but it will endure forever. For just as you saw a stone cut out of a mountain, yet not by hands, crush the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future. Now, the interpretation of this dream is certain, and the dream is certain, and its interpretation is trustworthy. And so basically, Daniel is telling the king, okay, this is what's going to happen, and buddy, you can take it to the bank. And so we know that this stone that is cut out of the mountain is the end time kingdom of Yeshua, where he's going to just crush all opposition. And it says, and then it will just cover the earth. This stone will just completely cover the earth, and we know that then it will last forever. And so that there's only one interpretation in my mind for that, and that is going to be the end times with Yeshua, where he's going to put an end to all these earthly kingdoms, and during the millennium, all the earth will be governed from Jerusalem by Yeshua. And then, of course, at the end, there will be a rebellion at the end of the millennium. But then at the end of that, then we come in with the new heaven and new earth, and then it's a forever thing after that. So that kind of puts it, the idea of the statue with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. And so I tell you what, we've got a few minutes